From the beginning, Madeleine McCann's disappearance has been surrounded by doubts and theories, but one thing has always been clear. The first hours after a crime are crucial. It is during this period that memories are fresh, traces can still be followed, and the right decisions can determine the success of the entire investigation. In Madeleine's case, these first hours were marked by a failure that changed everything. If mysteries that leave more questions than answers keep you up at night, this is your place. Subscribe now and activate the notification bell, because together we will unravel secrets that many prefer to keep hidden. Upon revisiting the case documents, one detail stands out: a discrepancy in how the Portuguese and British investigation teams approached the clues. In the first days, the local police were overwhelmed with media pressure and limited resources. Meanwhile, the British investigators, who could have contributed more technical expertise, were stuck in a dilemma. Trust the Portuguese authorities or intervene directly? This hesitation created a fatal delay, and amidst this chaos, a crucial mistake emerged. Investigators initially dismissed the testimony of a key witness who had reported seeing a man carrying a child on the night of the disappearance. This man was described as calm but in a hurry and was walking toward an isolated area of the village. At the time, the police considered the account inconclusive, arguing that it did not provide concrete information. But what if they had acted immediately? There is also the issue of tire marks found near the apartment. They could have led to a suspicious vehicle that was later identified as belonging to one of the main suspects, Christian Bruckner. Why were these clues not analyzed more thoroughly? Were the resources insufficient, or was there a conscious decision to prioritize other lines of investigation? And the most disturbing, a testimony that contradicted the official time of disappearance was left aside. A guest at the complex claimed to have heard unusual sounds before 9 p.m., but her account was not incorporated into the official timeline. This means there is a gap in the narrative, a window of time in which Madeleine could have been taken, and no one noticed. These mistakes, although they may seem small when isolated, form a sequence that weaken the foundation of the entire investigation. A delay here, a wrong decision there, and the case quickly turned into a labyrinth of unanswered questions. But why did these mistakes happen? It's easy to blame the tension between the teams, but there's something more unsettling about all this. When it comes to a case with so much global attention, were there external pressures to divert the focus? And more importantly, who would benefit from that? This initial failure is like an open wound in the Madeleine McCann case. It's the kind of mistake that makes us question, to what extent are we willing to accept the possibility that the truth was buried not for lack of evidence, but because of human choices? And if you think this is the end of the questions, believe me, there are more details that could completely change the course of this story. What was hidden behind the scenes? What perplexed me the most was the combination of silence and haste in the first days after Madeleine's disappearance. There were so many seemingly small details that, at first glance, appeared inconsequential. But now reviewing each one, it's impossible not to feel that something bigger was happening behind the scenes. Like, for example, the report of the tire marks, ignored as if they were just another casual element, but which might be the key to understanding how everything unfolded that night. And there lies the point that doesn't leave me at peace. What else was buried in the files, set aside by choices that may never be fully explained? Imagining that a crucial piece of evidence was ignored not only frustrates but also reveals the real impact of wrong decisions at such decisive moments. This is something that carries an emotional weight, not only for the family but for everyone seeking the truth in this case. But what truly changes the course of this story is what was found afterward. Because just like those tire marks, there is another detail that went unnoticed for years and could turn the entire investigation upside down. You are about to discover what no one expected and why this mistake might be the missing piece. The tire marks, ignored at the time, were found on a sandy terrain a few meters from the apartment where Madeleine McCann disappeared. The initial report mentions these marks as insignificant. However, years later, when comparing the tire patterns with vehicle records circulating in the area at that time, a match caught attention. A vehicle that belonged to Christian Bruckner, the main darkened windows, was repeatedly seen parked in isolated areas of Praia da Luz, sometimes at suspicious times. But the detail few know is that, in a local resident's own testimony, it is stated that this vehicle was spotted near the McCann apartment on the night of the disappearance. Why then were the tire marks not analyzed at the time? And here is something a Portuguese officer reported having warned about the need to investigate the van more thoroughly, but this recommendation was not followed through. Between bureaucratic delays and an alleged lack of resources, the clues that could have connected the vehicle to the crime scene ended up buried over time. There is also the testimony of a guest at the complex, who claimed to have seen a man loitering around the area that night, looking into windows as if assessing the environment. Her account was considered inconsistent, but when reviewed years later, surprisingly, the description she provided matched Bruckner's physical profile. How was this crucial detail ignored for so long? Additionally, there is the contradiction regarding the time of disappearance. Officially, Madeleine was last seen around 9 p.m., but a guest reported hearing hurried footsteps and muffled voices coming from a nearby corridor about 20 minutes before that time. Her account was not included in the official timeline. Did something happen even before Madeleine's parents realized her absence? And the most disturbing is what surfaced years later in an independent report conducted by British investigators. It mentions that one of the key witnesses, a friend of the McCann couple, pointed out inconsistencies in how the search was conducted in the first hours. The location where the tire marks were found, for example, was only examined 2 days later, when the area was already compromised and any potential evidence had been lost. This sequence of errors creates a clear picture. Something was neglected, whether out of negligence, lack of coordination, or perhaps something more intentional. The first days of investigation, which should have been crucial to unravel the case, were marked by questionable decisions that leave us with more doubts than answers. And this raises the question that refuses to be silenced. How many other important pieces of evidence might have been discarded or forgotten, hidden in archive reports? It's almost impossible not to imagine that an answer was there, in plain sight, but was left behind. The tire marks and testimonies have already created a disturbing scenario, but what followed was like turning a puzzle piece upside down. Amid the reviewed files, an almost forgotten report pointed to something shocking: a record of phone calls made in the area on the night of the disappearance. A call made from an unknown number to a cell phone connected to Christian Bruckner was traced to the vicinity of the McCann apartment, and it happened exactly at the time the witness saw the man carrying something. This changed everything, because until that moment, the van and the man's suspicious behavior seemed like just coincidences in an investigation riddled with failures. But now there was a point of connection, a phone call, with an exact location that could directly link Bruckner to the scene. When I came across this information, I couldn't stop thinking, why was this buried in the files for so many years? Did someone want this clue to be forgotten? What disturbed me the most was what came right after. The recipient of the call was never identified. The number did not belong to Bruckner, but was linked to another device that disappeared shortly after that night. Who was on the other end of the line? Who else knew what was happening while Madeleine was being taken? This is the question that still leaves us unsettled, and that could finally change the course of this story. The mysterious call that connected Bruckner to the vicinity of the McCann apartment that night was more than a clue. It was a direct link between the disappearance site and the main suspect. But like so many other pieces of evidence, it also carries its own mystery. Who was on the other end of the line? The missing number, which was never attributed to a name or face, represents a shadow within an investigation already marked by silent zones. Some believe that this number could be linked to someone closer to Bruckner than we imagine, perhaps an accomplice. Others question whether the phone call was just a deliberate distraction, something that occurred at the wrong moment, in the wrong place. However, there is something we cannot ignore. The content of the call will never be known. This lack of answers turns this clue into a greater enigma than any other puzzle piece. There is another disturbing hypothesis that also arose with this phone call. Could it have been part of a larger plan? Child trafficking networks often operate with surgical precision, relying on momentary contacts and exact coordination. If this was the case, the phone call might have been the signal for someone to act that night. This possibility is reinforced by reports of suspicious vehicles circulating the area in the days leading up to the disappearance. Some suggest that the phone call was a deliberate distraction. Imagine the scene: a call made intentionally to divert someone's attention or confuse future investigations. This would open another door. What if this missing number was linked to an attempt to protect Madeleine, but failed even before it began? The bigger dilemma lies in how this information was handled by the authorities. When the call was finally traced, the time to act had already passed. It was like finding a key without knowing which door it fits. The frustration of many investigators is precisely this: the impression that the pieces were there from the beginning, but were neglected, perhaps even willingly. This phone call is not just a detail lost amidst the confusion. It is an open wound that reminds us how human decisions, or the lack thereof, shape the outcomes of a case. It could have led to a name, a location, or even a confession. But now it is just another loose end in a story full of unanswered questions. And even with these theories, one thing is certain. Whoever was on the other end of that line knows something we do not. And that knowledge could be the difference between finding the truth or leaving Madeleine McCann to remain an unsolved mystery. Madeleine McCann's disappearance was not just a devastating blow to her family. It left a deep scar on the entire Praia da Luz community. For weeks, residents and tourists lived in a constant state of anxiety, as if at any moment something could be discovered or, perhaps, happen again. The streets, once quiet, were filled with a heavy silence. It was as if the village had lost part of its identity at that moment, forever marked by something that no one could fully comprehend. I wonder how it must have been for these people to live with the shadow of this mystery hanging over their heads. Seeing their village turned into global headlines, investigators coming and going, the media invading every corner, and, in the end, only questions remaining. Many residents reported feeling an emotional weight that never dissipated. After all, how do you return to normality when something like this happens so close to you? But the most disturbing thing is that, to this day, Praia da Luz is remembered for this case, a story that the community never asked to carry. And this leads us to a troubling question. How much did Madeleine's mystery affect the truth of those people? Could some of them know something that was never said? In the next moment, we will dive into this possibility and perhaps discover that some answers were closer than we imagined. The promise that the answers were too close to the village seemed absurd at first, but everything changed when an account was revisited, a testimony from one of the residents that had, until then, been completely dismissed. This person, who lived just meters from the apartment where Madeleine disappeared, reported seeing something peculiar the morning after the disappearance. A black plastic bag being thrown into a nearby garbage bin. He described the object as heavy and large, being handled by a man who avoided eye contact with anyone nearby. This detail should have been enough to raise an alarm. However, not only was the garbage bin never searched, but the testimony was also not included in the official line of investigation. When asked about this years later, the resident stated that he tried to insist but was never called to provide more information. And here is the detail that makes everything even stranger. On that same morning, witnesses saw Christian Bruckner's white van parked on the same street. Could the two events be connected? So a new analysis recently conducted shed light on this forgotten episode. According to experts, the area where the garbage bin was located was never examined with the proper technical resources. No forensic survey, no tracking of removed items. Over time, any potential evidence was lost. What is most striking is that, in the review of the case files, a map of the village highlighted this exact point as an initial area of interest for the police, but for some reason, it was crossed off the priority list. This raises another troubling question. Why was a location that clearly could contain clues ignored? Was the negligence accidental, or was there something more at play? Many believe that, with the pressure from the media and the tension between the British and Portuguese teams, the investigation became a game of interests, where important decisions were compromised. Additionally, a new angle emerges in the resident's testimony. During an informal interview conducted by an independent journalist, he revealed a detail he had never mentioned before. The man who was throwing the bag into the bin was wearing rubber gloves. This might seem like a trivial thing, but on a sunny morning in southern Portugal, this detail comes to dispose of something under seemingly normal circumstances. But the most impactful twist came from an unexpected source. A truck driver, responsible for collecting the garbage in that area, claimed to have seen the same bag being taken by his crew the next day. He described the object as rigid and heavy, different from the common waste he used to collect. However, when trying to communicate this to his supervisors, he was instructed to ignore the fact. And the bag? It likely ended up in a landfill kilometers away, lost forever. This sequence of events opens a new layer in the case. The black bag, the white van, and the man with gloves form a scenario that screams for answers, but at the same time, plunges the mystery into more shadows. Was this just another detail lost in a chaotic investigation, or are we looking at something that should never have been revealed? Either way, what is clear is that this clue, forgotten and buried over time, has the potential to rewrite parts of the story. The man, the bag, and the van cannot be ignored, and they lead us to a crucial point. What else was happening in Praia da Luz that morning that has yet to be discovered? The village of Praia da Luz was known as a haven of tranquility. Families strolled through the cobblestone streets, Children played without worries, and the sound of the waves filled the air with a calm that seemed untouchable. But on the morning after Madeleine McCann's disappearance, that peaceful scene revealed an invisible tension. Suddenly, that same place carried the weight of a dark secret, such a striking contrast that it is still hard to ignore today. I wonder how it must have been for the residents to wake up and realize that something terrible had happened there, right under their eyes. For them, it seemed impossible that someone, familiar or stranger, could have broken the security of such an intimate space. But at the same time, there were signs. Unusual behavior here, a strange face there, signs that were ignored because they didn't match what everyone wanted to believe. And it is precisely this that makes this case so unsettling. How does a place of peace turn into the stage of a global mystery? How does an environment that should protect end up allowing something like this to happen? It is this dichotomy between what seemed to be and what really was that leads us to more questions and to a specific detail that changes everything. The contrast between what Praia da Luz seemed to be and what really happened there is like a mask slowly falling off. The sense of security and tranquility that people knew was replaced by a mystery that was never solved. I believe that the gravest mistake in this case was underestimating the initial details, the clues that seemed small, but which, when connected, could have changed everything. For me, the clearest point is that there were human failures, and some of them may have been intentional. I cannot ignore the possibility that external pressures or larger interests shaped the course of the investigation. This is what bothers me the most, because in the end, the truth might be closer than we think, buried in files, forgotten by choices that should not have been made. If you've made it this far, comment. I am a guardian of the mystery in the comments, so I know you're following this quest for the truth with me. And if there's a mystery or story you'd like to see here on the channel, leave your suggestion. Now don't stop here. In the next video, we will dive into an even more intriguing case, which may reveal unexpected connections with everything we've discussed today. Subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and click on the next video to continue this investigation together.